Good evening, everyone. My name is Tasneem Chopra, and I'm thrilled to be here for this event in company with the incredible artist. Before proceeding, though, I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting today on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the land upon which this event is taking place, acknowledging any First Nations people with us today, paying respects to elders past and present, and noting that this land always has been and always will be Aboriginal land. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this vital, important, urgent conversation. You know, it's been classified as so many things, but I think above all else, it's an opportunity to have an intimate chat with an incredible writer and thinker. We are deeply honoured to be in the presence of one of the most compelling writers, certainly of the last 25 years, in Omar El Akkad, who's an Egyptian-born, American-based, award-winning journalist and novelist, whose fiction and reporting have dissected the brutal contradictions of our global order, from the war on terror to climate catastrophe, from Guantanamo to Ferguson. And his acclaimed novel, American War, stunned us with its problematic brilliance. And now, in his non-fiction debut, One Day Everyone Will Have Always Been Against This, Omar brings us a blistering reckoning that is part memoir and part manifesto. One Day is a refusal to stay silent in the face of genocide, reckoning with the systems of Western hypocrisy, the kind that polices resistance and rebrands complicity as neutrality, as it weaponises silence as a shield for atrocities. One Day asks the most difficult question of our moment, which is, when it mattered, who sided with justice and who sided with power? I have a few questions for you, Omar, and we're going to open to the floor as well towards the end of the session. But before I really get into it, on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is everyone's not okay, the world is very broken, and 10 is like, things are grand, where are you? This is the easy question.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this, first of all. It's a privilege to be here with you and with all of you. Thank you for coming out. This is not my normal by any stretch of the imagination. When I think of my normal event, I think of an event I did in Tampa once for my first novel, for American War. And it had just been nominated for an award, and so I was feeling real good about myself. And like, here we go, the career's taken off. And I went to this bookstore in Tampa, and 2.5 people showed up. And I'll explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
There was a couple, an older couple, who came and said, look, we don't know who you are, but we saw that you're Egyptian. Our son-in-law is Egyptian. His name's Mohammed. And then they stared at me like I was going to say, like, oh, Mohammed. And I had to explain that there's quite a few of us. And then the other guy had shown up on the wrong day. He was there for a different author, but immediately couldn't get up and leave because 33% of the audience would have gone out the room. So that's my very roundabout way of saying that I'm very grateful for this, and I don't take it for granted.
They
Thank you.
definitely know where they are. And it was a sold-out event, so you're in the right place.
Sure,
and
we'll
so
see.
Are they.
The night is young. Well, it's interesting because you develop social shorthand. I'm not the most sort of charismatic human being on earth, and I walk into a room and I need the shorthand, and it's, hey, how's it going? How are you doing? Yeah. And over the last 2 years, I mean, if anyone's going to answer that question, like the vast majority of people I talk to, in anything more intimate than the most passing setting, if they answer that question honestly, we're going to be there for a while. I was teaching in Qatar late last year, and I was teaching at the Georgetown campus, and they gave me this little office and had my office hours, and the student walks in and says, hey, my name's so-and-so, just wanted to come say hi and introduce myself, and he introduces himself. He says he's originally from Gaza, and so I immediately say, how's your family? And he says something like, well, my father's side mostly managed to get out, but my mother's side is mostly gone. And what the hell do you say? Like, I'm sorry for your loss? Like, what? And we're sitting there, we're talking, and I'm fumbling my way through the magnitude of this thing he had just told me, which in anything resembling a non-psychopathic world would bring everything to a grinding halt. And we finish our conversation. He says goodbye and leaves. And then 10 minutes later, I have to go give a craft talk about, the erotic possibilities of the run-on sentence in the short stories of Garth Greenwell. And you feel ridiculous, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what the hell are we doing? And so that's my very roundabout answer to your question is I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Okay.
And it's...
No, but I thank you for the
Yeah.
honesty. I think I think it's oddly, but not surprisingly, relatable to so many of us. We just turn up, we're on autopilot, and we just do the thing. But if we were to stop and pause and think about how we're actually tracking, it's not a pretty thing.
No.
Not by a mile.
No.
Which segues really nicely to my sort of second question, which is your book opens with the idea of fracture, a breaking away from the illusion that the polite Western liberal ever stood for anything at all. What broke for you personally, as a journalist, as an immigrant, and as a human, that informed the moment that you knew you had to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of separate it from all of the years leading up to the moment, because I know the moment, right? That there's a timestamp on the moment,
Yeah.
which is to say where the title of this book comes from, right? There's a timestamp on that tweet and the moment that I, very early on, like a lot of people, realized what I was watching, right? Which is an acceleration of something that has been going on for a very long time. But I often say that there's nothing in this book there's nothing this book indicts or interrogates or autopsies that I'm not directly complicit in. Like, for most of my life, I am exactly that person I'm talking about. And I've been rewarded for it. Whatever limited talent I have as a writer or as anything else, if I'm looking at whatever success I've had in life, that is minuscule compared to the fact that I sound like this.
Yeah.
And that if I called anybody up in this audience and said my name was John Smith, they'd probably believe me. Because from the age of 5, my parents have put me in British schools and American schools, and I know how to not seem far away. And if this book has any power at all, it's that Trojan horse capacity, particularly in the part of the world I live in, where you can disagree with every single word in the book, but it doesn't feel like it was written from far away, because I've known how to make myself close. There were all these sort of minor fractures that I was able to paint over for years and years and years. My capacity to compartmentalize for most of my life is hard to overstate. What I mean by that is, I was a journalist for 10 years, and I would go cover the war in Afghanistan, and I would see at all these forward operating bases that universally, without exception, the outer ring, the outer wire, where all the attacks are going to happen, that's guarded by Afghanistani troops. If somebody's going to die, they're going to die.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody's supposed to be on the same side, but the NATO troops are in there, and this is the cannon fodder, right? And you see it for what it is, and yet you're able to tell yourself, well, it's this moment, and it's this situation, and it's unique to... And then you go to Guantanamo Bay, right? And you see this ad hoc legal system being invented whole cloth with no sort of relationship to anything that might be recognized as fair or just law. You watch people being put in cages, you watch people held in indefinite detention, and you're able to tell yourself, well, it's just this moment, and it's unique, and what has happened over the last 2 years is that even my superhuman capacity for compartmentalization has fallen apart. I can't do that anymore. And I can point you to a million moments that changed me fundamentally. I don't know how you listen to the audio of Hind Rajab begging for her life and come out of that being the same kind of human being. I don't know, right? But I think it was sort of, there were all these little moments, and I was cowardly enough to be able to sort of paint over them. And that's gone now. I don't know what the hell is coming in its place. I don't know who I am on the other side.
Yeah.
But very early on, that fell apart.
Just on that, you describe a fiction a fiction of moral convenience where atrocities are justified, as you've just mentioned, as tragic necessities. This has to be done, but just this one time. How does this fiction sustain the world order, especially one that masquerades as democracy? Can it sustain?
No. Look, I'm of the opinion that none of this is sustainable, and I think that is, like, for me, a sort of fairly straightforward fact when you live under any kind of system that is insatiable, that has no such thing as enough, no conception of enough. There is no ceiling. And I think colonialism is that kind of system. Colonialism is an insatiable system. Whatever stage of capitalism we're in right now, I think, is an insatiable system. I was a tech reporter for many years. I was a business reporter. You cover Amazon's quarterly earnings. It doesn't matter what that number is. It matters how it compares to the same quarter last year. And that trajectory is infinitely upwards. And okay, Jeff Bezos has nicer and nicer yachts every year, and more power to him, I suppose. But this notion of insatiability, I think, is incompatible with anything sustainable. But I think the way I've sort of come to think of it is the sales pitch of colonialism never really changes, right? That the narrative beams, the narrative load-bearing beams of something like colonialism never changes. It's always this incredible coincidence. It's the greatest coincidence in human history. Those people from whom we want something just happen to be irredeemable savages. And so any amount of violence committed against them can be undertaken with impunity.
Do you think that the effectiveness of that campaign is wearing thin?
I don't know. I think, and the part that I don't know about is the wearing thin part. Because I know it's going to snap. And it snaps all of the time. People meet their thresholds of what they're willing to accept. But I think that particularly, I don't know what it's like here, but where I live, which is the loudest place on earth, there is such a complete sort of conflating of betterment and convenience that one is necessarily the other, which is to say that maybe in the back of my head, I know the gears that are turning and the people being crushed in the gears that are turning that cause my Amazon packages to arrive earlier and earlier. But hey, my Amazon packages keep arriving earlier and earlier, right? This notion of, for some people, up until the point it all falls apart, it's going to get more and more convenient. Your internet's going to get faster and this,
So it's greed, it's self-interest, it's all of those.
It's the reward punishment mechanism, right? And this is why when I go talk to sort of high school or college students, they very rarely find anything remotely profound or revolutionary in this book. They're well past that, right?
Yeah.
Up until my generation, at least, there was a very well-established sort of reward punishment mechanism. You keep your head down, you don't cause too much trouble. Not only will you avoid punishment, but you get the house in the suburbs and the two-car garage and the sort of life that is materially better than the previous generation. I go talk to these kids.
They're not buying that.
You're never getting a house.
Yeah.
On top of that, the planet might be unlivable, and so you can watch the calculus sort of fall apart. You watch the equilibrium fall apart. And I don't know how you sustain the sales pitch when somebody feels like serious damage is being done to their soul if they look away, and this phantom reward for looking away doesn't exist in the first place. So I do think it's going to snap. I just don't know if it sort of wears away.
No, I hear you, and I feel like the threshold has definitely reached new heights that we have not, many of us, seen in our lifetime. I guess just to pivot to another area that's another dimension of the exhaustion and the challenge. It's many institutions have silenced or punished those who have spoken out against genocide or for Palestine. How do you understand this coordinated suppression across bastions of journalism, academia, medicine, even the arts? So, what does it reveal to you about Western freedom of speech as a conditional privilege rather than a right?
It's a really good question. I think for me, it always comes back to this sort of chasm between the performance and the reality. and institutionally across, journalism, politics, academia, cultural institutions, across the board, that chasm has been glaring, especially over the last 2 years, right? So I did a lot of events for this book, and I would go do a number of cities, and afterwards you had the signing table, and I can't tell you the number of times journalists came up to me to essentially express disgust with the institutions they work for. If you're a reporter, if you're a journalist, your job is to know what the hell is going on. That's sort of the thing, right? Mm-hmm. Most journalists are not stupid. And so...
What do you say to them when they confess?
I try my best to sort of explain what I think is happening and what I think will happen if they raise hell about it. Because a lot of these folks are younger journalists, they're newer journalists, or people at the beginning of their careers. Mm-hmm. And I'm not, right? I left that world. And so it's very easy for me to say, protect your soul from this, because this is doing damage to your soul.
Fight the system.
But also, you go fight the system, right? It's your job on the line. I said, I'm unemployed. I've been unemployed for years. And I try to keep that in mind. But particularly with something like journalism, I think it gets at the heart of this chasm, right? Because even if you completely ignore what is happening in Palestine, what has been happening in Palestine for decades, if you completely ignore that, on any story, on any piece of journalism, I think every journalist has an obligation to think about how that story would be written in a vacuum, absent external pressures. And when I say external pressures, I mean advertisers threatening to pull their ads, or a CEO who knows the editor-in-chief making a phone call and then your life is hell, or you're in line for a promotion you don't get. Everybody knows what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, we all know.
How would you write that story if none of those pressures existed? And how do you write it knowing that those pressures exist? And what is the chasm between those two stories? Because that is the definition of journalistic malpractice.
Wow, yeah.
Right? And this is across the board, right? If any one of these Democratic politicians who are, in the U.S. are more than happy at every opportunity to tell me how they're the lesser of two evils and I have to vote, if any one of them just came out and said, look, and also we don't really care about people who look like you. Yeah. But we don't care slightly less than if there was a sense of honesty and I knew where I stood, it would almost be less infuriating than to have the smirking press secretary come out and talk about how we're, our desire for endless peace and that's what I keep coming back to.
Who now it seems it turns out he was already also against this now.
Yeah, he got the word former after his job title and suddenly he's
delayed morality, that one. In Australia specifically, we've seen writers and artists disinvited from festivals for expressing solidarity with what's going on. We've had institutions at the last minute supply memos for signing before participants enjoy festival participation as well. I've got this out, I love this quote. You've called out a cascade of institutional gutlessness, likening these institutions to reputation laundering firms with well-read boards. I love that. How do we rebuild?
I got yelled at by somebody for that. It was one of the many former relationships that I have with literary.
We think we know what side of the table they were on, though, right? So how do we rebuild artistic and literary spaces that tell truth rather than launder it?
So right now I'm back in Portland, where I live. I'm on the board of the state literary organization, this group called Literary Arts, which does a ton of really important work, and I'm a huge fan of theirs. Also, about a month or two ago, I signed this open letter calling on Literary Arts to stop having these two big banks sponsor our annual literary festival because they're heavily invested in weapons makers. And that has caused real friction, right? Because nobody else who signed that letter is also on the board of the organization. And so things got weird, right? Also, who cares? It's okay, But one of the interesting things about it is that I've sort of managed to wreck my relationship with a number of literary organizations over the last 2 years. And again, who gives a shit? It doesn't matter, right? But one of the interesting things about it is that you hear the same counter arguments over and over again, right? There's two that always come up. why us? We take money, we're the Robin Hood figure here, We take money they're invested in weapons makers, but then we take their money and we give it to writers, right? So that it's a net good in the process. And then the other argument is sort of, well, all money is covered in blood, And if now you're going to insert morality into this, we're not going to be able to have a festival because, okay, next year it's Alaska Air. Well, their carbon footprint is, And those are really compelling arguments for a certain kind of person, right? As is the whole, well, we don't take a political stand. We're up here. But you can say whatever you want. And again, 99% of the time, that stuff is really effective.
But do you interrogate that kind of very, very patchy justice? Because on the one hand, they might have said, what's happening in Ukraine is completely unsustainable and Black Lives Matter. But on this issue, well, it's complicated, Omar.
Yeah. I pulled up the old literary arts email that was literally titled A Message of Solidarity, and it was about the Black Lives Matter movement. I had a conversation with the folks in Penn who was, there was that sort of mutiny against, and I think for good reason. And it's not fair because the director left, and then there's these two new directors who I think are being thrown under the bus, but who knows? And they emailed and they said, can we just have a listening session? All right. And then, we were thinking, what should we do? And I said, think of the statement that you're going to put out on the 10-year anniversary of this genocide and put it out right now. And of course they're not going to do it, and it's flippant on my end.
That's
I
a very
suppose.
practical takeaway that we can all perhaps think about.
The less the scale and scope of the literary organization, of the arts organization, the more willing they seem to be to actually have a spine. Because once you get into the realm of, well, we're a multi-million-dollar organization, we have this event and this big sponsor, the idea of what it could cost you becomes like a division by zero error. You can't think in those terms.
Yeah.
Because the same day that I had that very awkward board meeting after that letter, I went and talked to a smaller group that does writing workshops for people who can't afford that kind of thing otherwise. And the guy didn't flinch.
Yeah.
He was like, yeah, of course. Of course we'd never take money from that. And so part of it, I think, is trying to build up newer systems from the ground up that aren't in a position where they're so dependent that it's unfathomable to not sort of turn off a certain part of your moral worldview. I don't know what happens once those groups get big enough. Maybe that same thing kicks in again. I don't know. But I do know that overwhelmingly the artists who have done the most work on this are the ones who have the most to lose. They're the younger artists, the less established.
Yeah.
I know so many writers who've lost their book contracts who probably never. Meanwhile, the folks who have the least to lose, silence.
And I think, I think a lot could be said on that, and we are going to open the floor up to questions in a short while. But I just want to jump now to the political landscape. You're unsparing in one day. You are unsparing toward both the political right and left, writing that progressivism often ends at the lawn sign. What do you think stops liberal democracies from translating empathy into action when the victims are brown or Muslim or poor? I mean, I think you used the quote, there's always room on a liberal lawn.
So where I live in Portland, if you're ever out on the West Coast, there's Highway 5 runs the length of the West Coast. It runs basically from the Canadian border to the Mexican border. And when you get to Portland, this highway sort of goes like this and then cuts this way down. It's a very weird, sort of artificial seeming. But there's a reason for it, right? Is that you got the Columbia River separating Washington and Oregon, and that used to be the site of shipbuilding during the war. And there were good middle-class jobs. And so right over here, there was a thriving middle-class black neighborhood in Portland. And that was an issue for the people who ran that city. And so instead of the highway going like this, the highway was designed to go like this, cut right through the middle of this neighborhood, sort of destroy it. And over time, the neighborhood couldn't withstand that. I mean, you go there now and it's nothing like that, like what it used to be. You also go to adjoining neighborhoods in Portland, and you will see neighborhoods in which every sign has a Black Lives Matter, every lawn has a Black Lives Matter sign on it. There's not a black family for like 20 blocks in any direction, right? Which brings me back to this notion of the performance versus the reality. I have a PhD in absolutely nothing, right? And you should take everything I say with a grain of salt. I don't know if the book's worth a damn. I don't know if anything I've written is worth a damn. I don't know the answers to any grand geopolitical problems. I do have a pretty good sense of what the prerequisites are. And the prerequisites, I think, are having enough of a sense of someone else's humanity to expand your imagination outwards as to how to create a better world. Not just for that person, but by extension for yourself. Mm-hmm. There's this thing that James Baldwin said, and he said it much better and more eloquently than I ever will, which is this notion of what racism does to the white mind, which was, in his opinion, far more damaging than it did to anyone else, which is tell this person, no matter how wretched your condition is, at least you're not black, right? There's this extension of assumed hatred that needs to be in place. And for years, I would get into this situation, particularly with the Middle East, particularly with Palestine, where I would be talking to somebody in the part of the world I now live in, and they would say, you know, it's all so complicated, this has been going on for so long, what can we do? Mm-hmm. And I would say, you know, okay, fine. It's, yes, battling each other for thousands of, sure, all that bullshit, whatever, let's take it all for granted. What if it was happening to you? What if it was happening to your neighbor? Maybe you don't come up with a solution, but I bet you your imagination suddenly expands quite a bit. And I got so sick of trying to make this argument that effectively I wrote a novel about it. It's called American War, and nobody has read it as that because it's got the word American in the title and everybody thinks it's a story about the US. But I think there's a kind of assumption of baseline cruelty that needs to be in place. And once you have sort of agreed to that, mm-hmm. there's a whole host of narrative tools that you can use to put distance between yourself and whatever personal moral implications can come from that cruelty. And this is where you get all of the, it's all so complicated, and you know there's bad people on all sides, and all of the stuff that's not intended to go anywhere. It's intended to do the exact opposite. It's intended to bring everything to a grinding halt right there. I think that's a huge part of it.
I mean, just on that again, the so-called rules-based order, right, of Western governments, it condemns, again, on one hand, and you've written this, the Western governments will condemn Russia's brutality while arming and financing Israel's assault on Gaza, for example, and more pointedly, within a rules-based order, we see situations where a leader of a nation can be horrified by images of beheaded babies that they've never seen, but at the same time be unflinching about the shredding of limbless babies that they have seen. How do you interpret this double standard? Is it hypocrisy, or is it something more imperial in nature?
I mean, I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary to the entire endeavor. There's a part I think I put it in the book, where I talk about being in Guantanamo, and we're touring the camps, we're touring the prison camps. And at one point I ask the soldier who's giving us the tour, I say, you know, so when do the prisoners, and he stops me and he says, there are no prisoners here, sir, there are only detainees. And that was really, really important to that guy. It was important to his conception of the place and his role in the place. Because a prisoner implies a prison sentence. Somebody has to define that at some point. Detainee you can just hold forever. There were no interrogations in Guantanamo Bay. Of course, people were being interrogated left, right, and center. They just didn't call it that. They called it reservations. Detainee 8653 has an 8:30 p.m. reservation. Means at 8:30 they were going to be taken into the interrogation shacks. When a number of those prisoners went on hunger strike to protest the conditions of their detention, they weren't going on hunger strike. They were engaged in asymmetric warfare.
Yeah.
Because their captors can't go on hunger strike back, so, you know, it's asymmetric, right? And again, like, it would be hilarious if the absurdity would be hilarious if it wasn't tied to something so grotesque. But everyone is aware that something monstrous is happening, which necessitates a monster. And if it's not the person or people or group that this is being done to, who's left? Who's left in the equation? Right? They have to be monstrous. And once they are, all bets are off. Right? Nobody is checking each barbarian at the gate. The whole point of barbarians at the gate is that it's a horde, and I've now relinquished, or I've sort of abdicated the obligation to think in the way I would think in any other situation. And so this is what I keep coming back to. I think this is not incidental. It's not just a function of obliviousness, although many of the people I spend most of my days around are actively oblivious. I think it is necessary for the endeavor to continue, because the moment you start to think otherwise, you have to contend with grotesqueness of such a scope and scale that it's very difficult to think about your place in it the same way ever again.
And do you think that grotesqueness singularly feeds into the dehumanization, again, of not seeing an entire peoples as human and equating them as being animals, for example, to make the deaths of Palestinian, Congolese, or even Sudanese children somehow less real to Western audiences?
I mean, it's very hard for me to sort of overstate the impact of that negative space. I'm of the firm belief that the vast majority of human beings behave in accordance with the worst thing that they think could plausibly happen to them.
Yeah.
Right? And I sort of talk about that in the book, where for some people, the worst thing that could plausibly happen to you is your entire bloodline being wiped off the face of the earth. And for some people, the worst plausible thing that could happen to you is somebody says something mean at a dinner party.
Yeah.
Or things get awkward in a conversation.
Or someone laughs at you. Yeah.
And if that's your worst thing, you're going to do everything in your power to avoid getting to that place, right? Again, because of how good I have been at setting aside my backbone and learning to be this person, I am so many people's like good brown friend, right? I know how to do this. As a result, I've been in a lot of rooms where there is some semblance of power, there's some semblance of decision making, and I'm the only one who looks like me. And you want to believe desperately, for both sort of good and selfish reasons, that your presence in that space is doing something, right? That you're changing the room.
Yeah.
I want to believe it because I want things to change. And I want to believe it because it allows me to continue entering that room and eating the really nice gourmet cookies that they've catered because they have the money to do that, and being in that space. And eventually you have to sit with the idea that maybe the room is changing you, right? I've had so many conversations where my book isn't changing a damn thing. I'm not changing a damn thing. What would change something is if there were people in that room who look different than everybody else in that room at a scale to affect that kind of change, as opposed to the one guy. I've been the one guy in a lot of these situations. I mean, we had this conversation about a festival recently where I had mentioned in passing to the organizer, who's someone I deeply like and respect, and I mentioned in passing, look, this is a difficult situation because the best I can tell, out of the 100 or so authors who are coming, I'm the one Arab guy, and this is going to be weird, right? And she wrote back and said, oh, I'm so sorry I hadn't noticed, like, there's this one Iranian guy there. And then I got an email like the next day being like, I realize that Iranians aren't Arabs. And then you sort of like dig up, like you could see the kind of, and it sucks. The whole thing sucks, but it's also indicative of another necessary component of all of this, which is like there's certain groups of people that the system needs you to not think of as fully human. Because as soon as you do, the rest of the workings of the machine can't keep working anymore.
That's right. There's a vested interest there. On the issue of people coming on board with the new thinking and reaching a threshold, or their threshold being tested too much, there's a painful irony now watching artists, writers, journalists, even some politicians suddenly discover the genocide after 2 years of silence. What is the moral cost, in your opinion, of delayed conscience at all? And how do we navigate the influx of latecomers to team it is a genocide?
Yeah, right. It's weird because I'm the angriest I've ever been in my life.
I just say you look really calm for someone so angry right now. I don't know how to feel about that.
So that's the thing, right? Is that you know that you can't yell.
Yeah.
In every interview I've done, I've been this calm. Because you can't be the angry brown guy. You can't. The second you do, that imagination I was talking about, in terms of what you are believed capable of doing, becomes unlimited. Suddenly becomes completely unlimited. And so I know in a very pragmatic sense that there's a certain point after which I become the worst object of somebody else's imagination, and there's nothing I can do about it. And one of the things that I'm angriest about is that pipeline, that escape hatch. And I've gotten letters about this book, like very complimentary letters, from politicians who occupied some of the highest offices in the Western world. I'm not saying this to like gloat about my book or what. I don't know how the hell this person got the book in the first place. It doesn't matter. What mattered is that this person now has the word former in front of their job title. And so suddenly the book is acceptable to think about. And in a wider sense, you can say the things that you must have always known. And because I'm so angry about this and the ease with which this can be done. And again, this isn't just this moment, right? George W. Bush isn't sitting in The Hague. George W. Bush is painting shitty portraits of immigrants, and he gets to do that for the rest of his life as the elder statesman whose chief talent is not being Donald Trump, right? That's, that's the reality of it. As a result of being this angry, I always want to believe that there's this immense cost coming. Right? Once we move into the history books, boy, you wait and see, First of all, we're all going to be dead. It's going to do nothing to bring back the dead who are being killed right now. Also, if we're going to create anything better than this, we can't keep offloading both consequences and moral judgment off to some future that's never arriving. We can't do that, right? And I find myself drawn to this in so many different ways because it feels like the most effective sort of plan of rhetorical attack. And it's in fact part and parcel of the thing that is infuriating me. What I mean by this is, in so many occasions, for example, I've always been tempted to make the argument to somebody that, like, look, it never stays over there, right? I saw the light armored vehicles when I was in Afghanistan. The next time I saw them was in Ferguson, Missouri. And police departments had them and were unleashing them on the citizens of that town, right? It's coming to your doorstep. Yeah. And that feels like the most compelling argument, right? Like, if you must, like, first they came for and then they came, right?
Yeah.
And it occurred to me after a while that in the process of doing this, I was ceding so much moral ground because effectively what I was saying was, look, right now it's happening to people that we all know aren't fully human, but they're going to come to the people like who are worthy of your attention soon, right? If that drone does nothing but kill that one Palestinian child and then is decommissioned, and that makes it no less evil. And I've been thinking about that because it relates, I think, to this notion of, well, the history books are gonna judge you for your.
Yeah.
No, I did. Hold on a second. Where is the conversation that you're having with yourself? Right? Like, This is nothing, right? This is the bare minimum I could have done and still called myself a writer. I'm not out there chaining myself to the gates of weapons manufacturers. I'm not doing the work. Those are people far, far braver than me. And I'm sitting here and I'm having that conversation with myself because it's my tax dollars that are killing these kids, right? I'm doing that. Why is it that I'm sitting and having this conversation for myself and you're signing a podcast deal, right? I don't give a shit what the history books are going to say about that. If I'm doing this, you should be too. All of us should be. And if we're not, it's indicative of an incredibly, incredibly ugly world.
Oh, thank you for calling it out. So, yeah, thank you. I am going to get you to do a short reading, but before I do, I just want to ask you one more question, which is, you've said this book is a breakup letter with the West, yet it's also written with heartbreak, not hatred, very, very significantly. Do you still believe in the possibility of moral renewal, despite everything we've discussed, and that courage can, as you write, be more contagious than complacency?
So, this is going to sound like a very tangential story, but my first novel is a book called American War, and if you've not read it,
you should.
it's not the happiest book in the world. So at one point, a Chinese publisher decides that they want the rights, and all I know about them is that they don't like the title American War. They want to change it. So I say, okay, sure. And then a few months later, I get a copy of the finished book. I obviously can't read the title. I have a friend who can, so I just show it to him and I say, hey, what does this say? And he looks at it and he says, it says nobody survives. So spoiler alert if you haven't read American War. The reason I bring this up is because hopefulness is not sort of my strong suit. I am simultaneously the most dejected and the most hopeful I've ever been in my life. And I realize how absurd that sounds to say, but
I don't think it does. I actually think it captures this moment quite brilliantly.
I mean, institutionally, absolutely, it's a breakup letter. In terms of the load-bearing beams, institutional load-bearing beams of the Western world, academic, political, cultural, you name it, there is a severance that I don't think I'm ever going to be able to bridge. Individually, I'm more inspired than I think I've ever been in my life. Yeah. What people are doing individually in solidarity with one another, in community with one another, I am the least brave human being you will ever meet. I need to leech courage wherever the hell I can find it, and I have found it in so many places, right? And I have no right to give up hope on somebody else's behalf, right? Because I get to sit on the launching side of the missiles. I get to sit in the heart of the empire, right? Knowing that my tax money is funding this carnage. The least I can do is not give up hope. But then on top of that, everywhere I go, people can see, right? Anywhere you live in the world, here, where I live, whatever, there's an unspoken contract, right? Here's what you need to pay for being in this society. And here's the rewards if you do pay it, and here's the punishments if you don't. And again, someone with as little backbone as me was willing to pay so much. And if I've hit my threshold, if I've hit the moment where I'm like, no, that price tag, I'm not paying it. I'm not paying it. I can't be the only one. And whatever the hell the leadership of those institutions believes they can get away with, I can never, ever bet against the overwhelming moral will of a people. That's where I draw my hope.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Thank you, Omar. I am going to ask you to... Can you see all the tabs? Yes. That is how good this book is. For those of you who have not read it, can I just say, Omar, you can coin a phrase. I haven't read such beautiful prose in such a long time. It was it's an absolute joy and delight to read. Please find your reading in there. Your writing is evocative, it's acerbic, it's unapologetic, but it's so gentle at the same time. It's everything all at once. It's like the best kind of smoothie you could have in a literary sense.
That is far more generous than I deserve. Thank you. I was doing this interview once with a podcaster. He ran the weirdest podcast. It was a books podcast, but he made it clear up front that he never read any of the books because he was afraid. No, wait, it gets worse. He was afraid if he read them, then he would spoil them while asking the questions. And I was like, why are you doing this? Like, what are you getting out of this? But so we're in the middle of this interview, and he gives me this thing that I've gotten a lot, and I suspect if there are any immigrants in the crowd, probably got as well. He says, your English is so good. And you want to say, like, look, man, it's a vulture language. Like, anybody can learn this. Come do classical Arabic. Like, see what that, But instead, I do this stupid thing I do, which I made a dumb joke. And I was like, well, actually what I do is I write the books in Arabic, and then I run them through Google Translate. And he believed me. And instantly, it was just too late to go back. You can't, And so the rest of the interview got even more awkward. So anyway, this was not run through Google Translate.
That's good to know. Good to know.
It was, however, I'm getting a settlement from one of the AI companies because they stole one of my books to train their. I'm getting like $3,000. The company's worth like 500 billion, I think, at this point.
A few more zeros under that would be good, but okay, we'll see what we can do. But okay, go.
But whoever wooed is in my income bracket. I also get that. This is the prologue. I don't know that you need to know much about it. This was also like, I wrote the book chronologically, or I wrote the book sort of from start to finish, so this was my entry point into trying to think of what the hell this book would be, and I think I rewrote it about a dozen times, and I was trying to get at something, precisely what you were talking about, this notion of like how easy it is to cast entire groups of human beings as just slightly subhuman, just enough. Yeah. Anyway, so this is from the very beginning. She is fog-colored when they find her. She believes she has ended. Like porters in service of some grotesque nobility, 6 men carry the stretcher out of something cavernous, something that used to be a home. And she, a girl of 9 or 10, is whisked away. Sitting on the stretcher, dazed and bloodied, she looks off to the side. She appears to be searching. The men who carry the stretcher move with urgency, as if the doing of care, of gentleness, can undo what has happened to this girl, to this place, to the bodies yet to be dug from beneath the rubble. Someone nearby asks God for revenge. Perhaps God is here somewhere, also searching. A soldier I met years ago, who made the study of industrial violence his hobby, once told me the first thing that kills when a bomb goes off isn't shrapnel or fire. It's the overpressure wave, air forced violently outward from the site of the blast. What you're supposed to do, he said, is drop to the ground and cover your ears. Breathe out. Empty your lungs before the air collides with and flattens them. Of course, if you're close enough, nothing you do or don't do will make any difference at all. He said the force of the overpressure wave weakens in proportion to the cube of the distance from the site of impact, which is to say, the most effective thing you can do to avoid getting killed by a missile or a mine or a grenade is to be far away when it goes off. How do you do that, I asked. Do what? Know when a thing like that is about to happen. Know to be far away. Well, he said, and trailed off. A few minutes later, he was telling the story of a freak accident his daughter had suffered as a toddler, how carrying her to the emergency room was the scariest thing he'd ever experienced. Even in his line of work, even with all he'd seen, the scariest thing. As the men carry the girl out of what used to be her home, she asks if they're going to take her to the cemetery. One of the men says, "Masha'Allah, Masha'Allah." In literal translation, the word means what God wills. A closer approximation of one meaning, is something like, what has happened is what God willed. But English, tasked with a word like this, turns stiff and monophonic, and masha'Allah is orchestral. To any ear that grew up on this language, it is clear that what the man means when he says this word is something else entirely, something instantly familiar to generations who've heard it spilling out the mouths of beaming grandmothers at the end of piano recitals and graduation ceremonies and at the first sight of a newborn. Used this way, it finds its principal purpose as an expression of joy. Look at this wonderful thing God has done. MashaAllah. Language, too, forces the air from the lungs. Beyond the high walls and barbed wire and checkpoints that pen this place, there is the empire. And the empire as well is cocooned inside its own fortress of language. A language through the prism of which buildings are never destroyed, but rather spontaneously combust, in which blasts come and go like Chinooks over the mountain, and people are killed as though to be killed is the only natural and rightful ordering of their existence, as though living was the aberration. And this language might protect the empire's most bloodthirsty fringe, but the fringe has no use for linguistic malpractice. It is instead the middle, the liberal, well-meaning, easily upset middle that desperately needs the protection this kind of language provides. Because it is the middle of the empire that must look upon this and say, yes, this is tragic, but necessary, because the alternative is barbarism. The alternative to the countless killed and maimed and orphaned and left without home, without school, without hospital, and the screaming from under the rubble and the corpses disposed of by vultures and dogs and the days-old babies left to scream and starve is barbarism. The girl on the stretcher believes she has ended. A man says to her, "Inti zay al-amar, you are like the moon." Again, translation fails. There is no English equivalent to the lineage of this phrase, a lineage that runs through generations of old movies and love songs and family gatherings. Listen to the sly-setting joy and pleading, raw pleading, that carries the words as this man tells the girl who lived when so many others died that she is beautiful beyond the bounds of this world. Zay al-amar. Something has ended here, but something else begins. The dead dig wells in the living.
Wow. Thank you so much. And that's just the prologue. That is just a sample of how incredible the book is, well beyond that too. We have a few minutes left for questions, and we have several questions ranging from your view on the ceasefire. I mean, which could probably take another hour in and of itself, but I am going to go to something that's been upvoted a few times, which is, you wrote, Northrop Frye said, all art is a metaphor, and metaphor is the grammatical definition of insanity. What is your relationship to metaphor/art/insanity now?
That was upvoted by several people.
Yeah, that is number one.
It's a fucking good question. I'm not slamming the question. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, I love Northrop Frye. There's you can look it up. It's on the U of T, the University of Toronto website. They have they videotaped a lecture series that he gave, and it was the class was called Literature and the Bible, but it should have been called sort of Northrop Frye is incredibly famous and can talk about whatever he wants, because it's basically just 13 classes of him just wandering off to very, very interesting places.
Also,
in
you
his
have
mind.
like a minute to answer this question.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I need another like 20. But he was talking about this idea of a metaphor is the grammatical statement, this is that. Mm-hmm. But this is not that, this is this. And so that's what he meant by the sort of definition of insanity. If you're writing in any way, if you're engaged in literature in any way, you are trying to say something about what it means to be human. And so for me, when I think about this notion of insanity, I think of all the fundamentally irrational things we do to one another and we do to ourselves. Love is irrational. Memory is irrational. Hatred, all of these things. And I think, to me, the writing that changes me the most is not writing that tries to make sense of that. It's writing that sits with it. And so that's what I'm trying to do at any given moment. And the vast majority of the time I fail. The vast majority of the time this instinct to try and make sense of it all kicks in. And I think honestly, not just in this book, but in the previous books and everything I've written, you can see the places where it got away from me. You can see the impulse where it got away and made the writing weaker. And I think in the long run, it is the weakest parts of the writing. It's also the most interesting because it tells me something about myself. But that's conceptually the short version of what could be like 2 hours of me nerding out about craft and all the rest of it.
That was impressive, actually. Next one is we talk about moral convenience, but we also have moral purity tests in progressive spaces. How do you see the impact of that playing out in the future?
Yeah, that's also a really interesting question because if I'm being perfectly honest about it, and again, I've sort of meandered through various spaces, both as a journalist and now as whatever the hell it is I am, a writer of some kind, but and if I'm being perfectly honest with you, there have been spaces where I have been surrounded by the people doing the most work, the people who I believe are the most morally correct, the most courageous, and I've left that room thinking, Jesus Christ, I don't want to talk to most of you again. I'm so grateful for the work you're doing, but we're clearly not. And this is important, right? Because who gives a shit, right? Like this, everything is weighted against that kind of work. And everything is weighted against somebody who is sacrificing to do that kind of work. There is exhaustion. Every day you wake up and every system of power is trying to crush you. That is exhausting, right? There's infighting. You're not looking away from the horror, and the horror is making you angrier, and you're going to take that out somewhere. There's also the fact that the second that you want a better world, the ceiling on that is unlimited. You and I both want a better world. Maybe you want to tear it all down and start from scratch. Maybe I just want to tax billionaires a little bit more, right? So inevitably we're going to find points of disagreement. All of that is not present in the really nice boardrooms that I walk into where everybody is civil and polite and they are the nicest that anybody has ever been to me, and they are fully oblivious of everything that is happening. And this is a real issue, right? Because it results in people for whom the worst possible thing is somebody not being nice to you, and completely discounting the work that I guarantee you in the history books is going to get the brightest, most positive spotlight. And I think at the very least it's worth keeping that in mind, but I have been deeply susceptible to this notion of, Jesus Christ, like, yeah, we can sit here and call each other comrade, like, great, fine, whatever, but like, I've been susceptible to that, and it doesn't change the fact that one of those rooms has people in it who are trying desperately to make the world a better place, and the other has people who might be the nicest human beings on earth, but for whom none of this matters.
That's true. Look, we're actually at time now. I do apologise for the many questions that weren't answered.
This is not your fault.
But no, but can I just say, Omar, you have been the most self-deprecating and yet honest and brilliant writer and guest to have in this capacity. And the book itself is a gift. I know you keep saying it's the smallest, it's the least you could do. I think there's so much in there, and there's a reason why Chris Hedges has listed it as his number one, I believe, literary recommendation. That's just last week. So straight hot off the press, I want to thank you for your time, for your honesty, your candour. I know you're still recovering from jet lag, and you have a 3 a.m. virtual session that you've got for a client in the next 6 hours. So thank you for giving us your time. Before I make my next announcement, I want to say that the Wheeler Centre's fundraising appeal for the inaugural Oz Art Giving Day starts tomorrow. Its goal is to raise $5,000 to support the Next Chapter program, which is an important program elevating Australian stories that aren't being told and nurtures a new wave of writers to tell them. Importantly, every donation to the Wheeler Centre will be doubled thanks to the generous support of their patrons, Maureen and Tony Wheeler, who will match every dollar that you give. And so for more details or to donate, you can scan the QR code on the screen behind me. We have the local bookseller Amplify who's selling copies of Omar's book one day. Please stick around for a copy and a chance to maybe say hi and chat to Omar. Thank you everyone for attending. Omar, thank you so much for gracing us with your time, with your honesty, with your humour and with your bravery for writing this book, which I think many of us wish we could have written but just lacked the courage and the capacity and the skill to do, but you have done that. I do note that your favourite book was Little Women.
This is an
And can I
internet
just say-
lie and distortion. Although I did love Little Women, I'm not going to lie.
I heard you say it in a video, and can I just say, what a jump, what a jump. Please thank our guest, Omar El Akkad.